The gavel cracked once across the Salina County courtroom before anyone had finished sitting down. I was still tucking my coat under me when the sound went off, sharp as a rifle bolt, and the bailiff said all rise like we hadn't already half risen. People settled wrong after that. Coats half off, a folding chair scraping in the second row, my father in his good gray suit at the petitioner's table, hands folded, head bowed like a man at a graveside. Harlan Ladner could grieve on command. He had been doing it my whole life, and most of the county had stopped checking whether the grief was real. My name is Mabel Ladner. I am 41 years old, and on that Tuesday morning in Salina, Kansas, I sat in the third row of Judge Whitcomb's courtroom on West Ash Street and decided I would not say one word. I would not say one word in that room for 9 minutes, and by the time I finally did, the man who raised me would never be believed in this county again. I did not know that yet. I only knew the rule I had carried since I was a girl. When they have already decided you are lying, the worst thing you can do is talk. So I kept my back straight and my hands folded in my lap, and inside my coat pocket, my thumb found the brass shotgun shell I always carried, worn smooth, warm from my body. Graham gave me that shell when I was 11, out behind the brick house on Santa Fe Avenue, and she taught me to count my breaths against the weight of it. 1 on the load, 2 on the aim, 3 on the squeeze. I was counting now. Nobody in that room could see it. That was the point. The hearing was for the estate of Ada Ruth Ladner, my grandmother, Graham. She had been gone 11 days, and her narrow brick house on Santa Fe was already being argued over like a hog at auction. You have to understand how it works out here, to understand how a thing like this gets so far. Out past the grain elevators on Old Highway 40, the Ladner farm has been ours for 4 generations. Wheat and Milo and a barn my great-grandfather raised by hand. My father runs it now, or says he does. In a town this size, a family's reputation is the only currency that never inflates. And for 31 years, my father had spent mine. I was the family liar. That was the title. He gave it to me when I was 9 years old, after I told the truth about something the family did not want said, something that happened in that farmhouse on a winter night that I will get to. It does not matter right now what it was. What matters is that he could not have me believed. A believed child was a danger to him, so he made me the girl who made things up. And he was patient about it, and he said it so often and so calmly that even I started checking my own memory against his certainty. That is how you break a person, not with shouting, with repetition. By the time I was 12, I had a habit they all laughed at. I wrote things down, dates, times, what was said, who said it. In a small, even hand in cheap spiral notebooks, I bought 3 for $1 at the Ben Franklin on Santa Fe. If I could not be believed, I could at least be accurate. My father turned even that into a joke. Your little notebooks, he called them, the way you would say a child's blanket. There's Mabel with her little notebooks writing down the weather. He said it at Thanksgiving and at the feed store, and once, loud, at my cousin's wedding, and the whole table laughed because he laughed first. I joined the Navy at 18. Left the county on a Greyhound the morning after graduation with 1 duffel and $40. My father told everyone I abandoned the family, that I ran off and left him short a hand at harvest, that I thought I was better than the dirt I came from. He never once said the word Navy without a curl in his lip. In his telling, I disappeared for the easy life, and what I actually did in those years was not a thing he ever asked about, and not a thing I ever told. I had my reasons for the quiet. Those come later, too. Graham was the only one who wrote to me. Every month, a letter in that small, precise hand so much like my own, except mine was learned from hers at the kitchen table on Santa Fe, with a ledger open between us and her finger moving down a column. "You always keep the truth, Mabel," she told me once, "so keep it where they can find it when they're finally ready." I was 12 and did not know what she meant. I thought she meant the notebooks. So that is the family the judge was looking at when Whitcomb settled his glasses on his nose and the lawyers began to talk. My father's attorney was a Salina man named Pruitt. Soft-handed, expensive for around here. He stood and laid it out clean. Ada Ruth Ladner, late of Santa Fe Avenue, had no surviving spouse. Her only living child was the petitioner, Harlan Ladner. The natural order of things, Pruitt said, was for the home place and the modest estate to pass to the son who had stayed, who had worked the land, who had cared for his mother in her decline. He said decline like a man laying a flower. He did not mention that I was the one who drove Graham to her doctor in Salina the last 2 years. He did not mention me at all, except once near the end, when he turned and looked at me in the third row and said there was a granddaughter who had, regrettably, inserted herself into Mrs. Ladner's final affairs. Inserted myself. I wrote that down, small, even hand in the notebook on my knee. Pruitt saw me do it, and something flickered behind his eyes, and he moved on. Then there was the matter of the will. Graham had a new one, drawn up 19 months before she died, signed and witnessed at a lawyer's office on Santa Fe, and it did something my father had not seen coming. It moved the house, and a thing called the residue of the estate, away from him. Not to me. The will did not say to me. It said the home on Santa Fe Avenue and its contents were to be held and inventoried in full before any distribution, and that her household records were to be entered into evidence as her true accounting. Strange words for a will, the kind of words a precise woman chooses on purpose. My father did not like the new will, so that morning he had come to do what he did best. He had come to break the record before anyone could read it. Pruitt sat. The judge asked if the respondent wished to be heard, and before my own lawyer, a tired young public side attorney named Coyle, could fully stand, my father rose at the petitioner's table. He had not been called. He rose anyway. He let the silence sit one beat, two, the way a man does when he has practiced. Then he spoke, and his voice broke just enough. "Your Honor," he said, "I'll keep it short. My mother was a dying woman, and in her last years, a person got close to her who shouldn't have, got into her papers, got into her accounts, talked her into changing a will she'd kept the same for 20 years. The gallery was very quiet now. He had them. He always had them. That person is sitting in this room," he said, and he did not point. He just turned his head toward the third row, slow, sorrowful. My own daughter, and I take no joy in saying it. She stole from a dying woman. She has lied to this family since she was a child. Ask anyone in this county. And the medals, Your Honor, the uniform she trots out, the war hero story. He let his voice drop. "Every medal you wear is fake," he said. He said it to me, across the courtroom, but loud enough for the back wall. Everyone. There's no record of any of it. I raised a liar, and I've spent my whole life cleaning up after her, and now she wants the roof over my head. I did not move. I want you to understand what that took. Not the not moving, the not believing it could still hurt. I was 41 years old, and I had stood in places that would turn most of that gallery's hair white, and a soft gray-suited man could still reach into my chest and find the 9-year-old and squeeze. People mistake stillness for calm. It is not calm. It is a held breath. 1 on the load, 2 on the aim. I lowered my eyes to the notebook on my knee. The gallery read that as guilt. I knew they would. A woman who won't look up has something to hide. I had lived inside that math my whole life. The thing they never learned is that looking down is also what you do when you are reading. Judge Whitcomb did not love the speech. I watched his jaw, but he was an old man near retirement, and the facts in front of him were thin and tilted, and the only documents on his bench that morning were the petitioners. My grandmother's true accounting, her household records, the things the will demanded be entered into evidence, were not there. Nobody had produced them. The house on Santa Fe had been locked since the funeral, and inside it somewhere were the papers that would have answered every word my father said, and no one had the key to the one room that mattered. There was a room in that house. At the back, off the kitchen, Graham's sewing room. It had a real lock, a brass one, old, and she had kept it locked for as long as I had been alive. When I was small, I asked her once what was in there, and she said, "The truth, mostly, and some fabric." And she laughed and did not open the door. After she died, the family went through every drawer in that house looking for cash and silver and the deed. They could not get the sewing room open. My father had told the estate it held only her old sewing things and was not worth a locksmith. He believed that. He wanted to believe that, so the judge ruled on what was before him. He ruled that morning, pending final accounting, that the home place and residence at Santa Fe Avenue would be provisionally signed over to the petitioner, Harlan Ladner, as the sole surviving heir, subject to the production of any contrary instrument within 30 days. 30 days. A formality, Pruitt would have called it. A door closing is what it was. My father had the house, he had the land already, and he had, in front of half the people I grew up around, called me a thief and a fraud and a liar with fake medals, and the law had just nodded along. My father did not smile. He was too good for that. He let his shoulders sag with the weight of a hard duty done, and he shook Pruitt's hand, and an aunt of mine reached over the rail to pat his arm. I sat in the third row and folded my notebook closed and slid it into my coat, against the brass shell, and I counted. 3 on the squeeze. I had one thing my father did not know I had. 2 days before, sorting the box of Graham's personal effects the funeral home released to next of kin, I had found a small brass key wrapped in a square of blue gingham, pinned to a card. On the card, in that small, even hand so much like mine, 4 words, "Start in the sewing room," and below the fold, a name I did not know, written the way Graham wrote a thing she meant to come back to, underlined once, for the Vance boy. I had no idea who the Vance boy was. I had no idea yet what was behind that brass lock on Santa Fe Avenue, or that a leather-bound ledger waited there with my whole life logged inside it in a hand that did not stop the day my grandmother did. I only knew the hearing was over, and I had lost, and I had 30 days. I stood when they told us to stand. I did not look at my father. I walked out of the courthouse on West Ash into a flat white Kansas morning, and I drove the 4 blocks to Santa Fe Avenue, and I parked in front of the narrow brick house where I learned to read a column of numbers, and I sat there a long moment with the brass key in my palm. Then I went up the walk to open a door my father swore was empty. The key turned, like it had been waiting. I want to be honest about that morning because honesty is the only thing I have ever owned outright. The front door of the brick house on Santa Fe Avenue opened on the smell I had known my whole life. Lavender and old paper, and the faint sweetness of the peppermints Graham kept in a dish by the door. The house was cold. They had shut the furnace down after the funeral to save the estate $1, my father's idea, and the cold made everything feel paused, like the rooms were holding their breath the same way I was. 1 on the load. I stood in the hall and let the door close behind me, and the latch clicked, and for the first time in 11 days, I was somewhere my father could not perform. The family had been through that house. You could see it. Drawers left open an inch, the way a person leaves them when they are looking for something specific and not finding it. The good silver gone from the sideboard, claimed by an aunt before the body was even in the ground. They had wanted cash, the deed, anything that turned into money fast. They had not wanted what Graham actually left because they did not know to want it, and because the one room that held it had a brass lock they could not pick and would not pay to open. I went down the hall to the kitchen. The table was still there, the oak one with the burn ring where a hot pot had sat in 1970-something, and the 2 chairs, and the place by the window where the light came in over a person's left shoulder so you could read a column of numbers without squinting. That was my seat, Graham put me there when I was small and taught me to read down a line of figures and find the one that lied. "Numbers don't lie, Mabel," she used to say, "but people use them to. Your job is to know the difference." I put my hand flat on that table and stood a second. Then I went to the back, off the kitchen, to the sewing room door, the brass lock, the one I had asked about when I was a child and been told held the truth, mostly, in some fabric. I took the little key from my coat, the one wrapped in blue gingham, and I fit it to the lock, and it turned like it had been oiled the week before. Maybe it had been. Graham had thought of everything else. The room was small, a treadle sewing machine under a dust cloth, bolts of fabric stacked on a shelf, gingham and chambray and a deep navy wool, a dress form in the corner that had startled more than one person over the years, standing there in the dark like a patient woman, and against the far wall, a low cabinet I did not remember, with 2 doors and a flat top, and on the flat top, square in the middle where I could not possibly miss it, a leather-bound book. It was the size of a family Bible. Brown leather worn pale at the corners from handling. I knew that kind of book. It was a ledger, the old kind, the kind the feed store still used when I was young, ruled in faint blue and red, a column for the date and a column for what came in and a column for what went out, and a wide column on the right for remarks. I lifted it. It was heavier than it looked. A length of green ribbon marked a page near the back, and tucked under the front cover, held with a rubber band gone soft and sticky with age, was a folded square of paper in Graham's hand. I sat down right there on the floor of the sewing room in my courthouse coat, with the cold coming up through the boards, and I read it. "You always kept the truth, Mabel. I kept it with you. Start at the front and read it through before you let anybody tell you what it says. You were loved and provided for all along. Don't you ever let him say otherwise again." I read that 4 times. I am not ashamed to say my eyes filled, because there was nobody there to call it a performance, and a thing I had wanted my whole life had just been handed to me by a woman who was no longer alive to see me get it. You were loved and provided for all along. I had spent 30 years believing I had been tolerated at best. Graham had known. Graham had written it down where they could find it when they were finally ready. So I started at the front, and I read. The first entries went back further than I expected, more than 20 years. Graham's small, even hand, the hand I had learned mine from, marching down the page. At first, it read like exactly what my father told the estate it was, an old woman's household book. Eggs sold, a quilt commissioned, property tax paid on the house, $2 to the church flower fund, the ordinary arithmetic of a careful life. And then, threaded through it, getting thicker as the years went on, something else. She had been tracking the farm, not her farm, the Ladner farm, out on Old Highway 40, the one my father ran or said he ran. Graham had owned a piece of it. I knew that, a share that came down to her from my great-grandfather, and my father managed the whole operation and sent her what he said was her portion. And Graham, careful Graham, had written down every dollar he sent her, and beside it, in the remarks column, what the crop should have brought. Wheat prices, Milo prices, acres planted, which she got from the county. She had done the math my father assumed no old woman would do, and the 2 numbers, what he sent and what was owed, did not match. Year after year they did not match, and the gap grew, and in the remarks she had written things like, asked H about the difference, told me grain prices were down, prices were not down, and once, simply, he is taking it. I sat on that cold floor and turned pages and felt the morning rearrange itself around me. It got worse, or better, depending on whose side of the ledger you were on. 11 years back, she had started keeping copies. Tucked between the pages were slips, real ones, bank carbons and loan papers, and once a photocopy of a check, and on several of them a signature I had seen 1,000 times. Harlan Ladner, except Graham had written beside one of them, in her plain hand, "This is not my signature." And beside another, he signed my name to this, and pinned to a loan document dated some years back was a small note. He has borrowed against the place using my name. If I am gone and you are reading this, that is why. He had been forging her. For years, borrowing against land and a share that were not entirely his, signing her name to do it, and telling the county and the church and his own daughter that he was the long-suffering son holding it all together. The medals are fake, he'd said that morning. Everyone. And the whole time, the genuine forgery, the real fraud, was his own hand on paper he had no right to sign, copied out and dated and witnessed by a dying woman at a kitchen table, waiting in a locked room. I understood him then better than I ever had. My father was not cruel for sport. He was drowning. 2 missed payments, I would learn later, from losing the farm entirely, and he had already quietly spent an inheritance he thought was coming. An inheritance Graham had quietly moved out of his reach the moment she understood what he was. Everything he said in that courtroom was a man bailing water. He needed me to be the thief so that no one would look at his hands. He needed the medals fake so that no one would ask why a decorated daughter would have to steal from anyone. His cruelty was panic wearing its Sunday suit, and it had fooled a county for 30 years, because panic that calm does not look like panic. It looks like grief. It looks like a father doing a hard, sad duty. I kept turning pages, and then I reached the green ribbon, and the page it marked stopped my breath cold. The entry was in Graham's hand, the same small, even letters, and the date at the head of the column was 3 days after the morning Graham had her stroke. I knew that date. I had been there. I had driven down from where I was living and sat in the Salina hospital and held a hand that did not hold back, and Graham had not written anything for anyone after that morning. She could not. And yet here was a page, her hand 3 days later, clean and sure, logging a figure and a remark. For a moment the floor tilted under me and I thought, the way you do, that I had the date wrong, that I had misremembered the worst day of that spring. I had not. I never get dates wrong. That is the one thing about me that has always been true. Someone had kept writing in Graham's hand after Graham could no longer hold a pen. I sat with that for a long time. Either the dates in this entire ledger meant something other than what they said, or someone had learned my grandmother's hand well enough to finish her book for her, and either way, the whole record I had been trusting had a second author I could not see. I did not know yet which it was. I only knew that the thing in my lap was either far more powerful than I had thought, or far more fragile, and that I had 30 days, minus the morning I had already spent, to find out before a judge signed this house and everything in it over to the man whose forgeries filled its pages. You have probably already guessed who finished the ledger. You have not yet. I had to drive a good many miles before I understood it, and the answer was closer to me than the chair I was sitting in. I closed the book around the ribbon. Tucked into the very back cover, behind a flap of leather I almost missed, was a stiff envelope, government weight, the flap still sealed, a string of numbers printed across the top, and a stamp I knew on sight even after all these years. My own name was typed below the stamp. I did not open it. I want that on the record. I held my own sealed file in my 2 hands in that cold room, and I did not break the seal, because a sealed thing read by the wrong hands becomes worthless, and because some part of me already understood that the only place that envelope should be opened was on a judge's bench, by someone with the standing to read it aloud, so keep it where they can find it when they're finally ready. Graham had said that to me when I was 12. She had not been talking about the notebooks. In the remarks column of the very last page, beside no figure at all, Graham had written one more line, underlined once. The way she wrote a thing, she meant a person to chase down, for the Vance boy, and a town. Lindsborg, 20 minutes south on the 99. I did not know any Vance boy. But I knew my grandmother, and I knew that when that woman wrote a name in a margin and underlined it, she was leaving a door propped open for someone to walk through. So I wrapped the ledger and the sealed envelope in the navy wool from her shelf, because that felt right. And I locked the sewing room behind me, and I carried the truth out of the house my father swore was empty, and laid it on the seat of my truck like a passenger. Then I drove south on the 99 out of Salina, past the last of the grain elevators and into the open country to find out who the Vance boy was and why a dying woman had wanted me to know his name. The 99 runs straight as a plumb line out of Salina, and I have always done my best thinking on a straight road. The grain elevators fell behind me one by one, white and then gray and then gone, and the fields opened up flat and green with the winter wheat just turning, and I held the wheel with both hands and let the ledger ride beside me under the navy wool. I am a woman who likes a fact she can stand on, and the fact I had was thin. A name I did not know and a town I had driven through maybe 9 times in my life. The Vance boy, Lindsborg. I said it out loud in the cab, the way Graham used to say a number she wanted to remember, to give it weight, and the cab gave it back to me and nothing else. Lindsborg is a small town, Swedish to its bones, painted horses on the corners, and a main street you can walk in 4 minutes. I parked on the main drag and I did the thing my grandmother taught me to do when the numbers run out, which is to go ask a person who keeps them. I went into the hardware store because a hardware store in a small town is a kind of church, and everyone passes through, and the man behind the counter has been there since the Eisenhower administration and knows every family back 3 generations. He was sweeping when I came in. I asked him, plain, if he knew a family named Vance. He stopped sweeping. He looked at me a long moment, the way country people look at you when they are deciding how much of the truth you have earned. And then he said, there was no Vance family, not anymore. But there had been a boy, a foster boy. Came through the county home young, bounced from place to place, the kind of child a town learns to expect trouble from, and then is disappointed to be right. Toby Vance. And then the man's face did something, softened around the eyes, and he said, but he turned out all right. That one. Better than all right. Welds for the Wind Company out west of here now. Bought his mother a house. Except she wasn't his mother. I asked who she was. He leaned on the broom and he said, an old woman from over in Salina used to drive down here once a month, regular as the first of the month, and pay his way. Through the trade school in Hutchinson. Nobody ever knew exactly why. He thought her name was Mabel. No, he corrected himself. Ladner. She went by Ladner. I stood very still in that hardware store with the smell of cut keys and machine oil around me, and I understood that my grandmother had been living a second life 4 blocks and 20 minutes from the one I thought I knew, and that she had been doing it the entire time my father was telling a county that the woman could barely manage her own checkbook. I found Toby Vance at the Wind Company yard that afternoon. They paged him off the floor and he came out wiping his hands on a rag. A big young man, maybe 25, with careful eyes and a careful way of standing. The way a person stands when they have learned early that the room might turn on them. I told him my name. I told him I was Mabel Ladner's granddaughter. And this enormous young man with the welding burns up both forearms put his hand over his mouth and turned away from me for a second. And when he turned back, his eyes were wet, and he said, she told me you'd come. He said it like it cost him something. She told me a woman who counted things would come, and I was to give her the box. We sat on the tailgate of his truck in that gravel yard with the turbines turning slow and white on the ridge behind us. And Toby Vance told me about my grandmother. He told me she had found him when he was 11 and angry and headed nowhere good, that she had not adopted him, had not made a show of him, had simply shown up once a month, paid his school, sat with him at a kitchen table on Santa Fe Avenue, and taught him, of all the things in the world, how to keep a ledger. Numbers don't lie, Toby, he said, doing her voice without meaning to, but people use them to. I heard my own childhood come out of a stranger's mouth, and I had to look at the ridge a while. And then he told me the thing that turned the whole morning over. When Graham had her stroke that spring, Toby said she was not, in those first days, entirely gone. She came back enough, for short windows, to know what she wanted, and what she wanted was the book finished. There were entries she had not made yet, payments she had logged in her head but not on the page, and she could no longer hold a pen steady. So she had him do it. He sat at her bedside in the Salina hospital with the ledger open on his knees, and she told him the figures one at a time, the dates, the remarks, and he wrote them down. And because she had taught him her own hand on purpose, year after year at that kitchen table, drilling him on the loops and the slant until his looked like hers, the page came out in her writing, her even, small, truthful hand. Written 3 days after the morning everyone thought she had gone silent for good. Written by a boy she rescued, taking dictation from a woman finishing her own record before she set the pen down for the last time. You have probably already guessed who finished the ledger. I told you that you had not yet. Now you know why. It was not a forgery and it was not a ghost. It was love that had been taught a skill on purpose, years ahead of the day it would be needed, by a woman who planned the way other people pray. Toby gave me the box. It was a shoebox, and inside it were the things too loose to live in the ledger. Bank stamps, a small stack of canceled checks, and carbon receipts monthly going back 11 years, made out from M. Ladner to a name I did not recognize. A woman over in Abilene. I asked Toby if he knew her. He did. A war widow, he said. Her husband had been a guardsman, lost overseas a long time back, and the survivor's money had snarled up in some paperwork that never untangled, and she'd been about to lose her house when the checks started coming, from Graham. Quietly. The first of the month, same as his own school money. My grandmother, the woman my father swore had been robbed blind by her own granddaughter, had been the silent hand under 2 strangers' lives for over a decade, paying it out of the very share my father was busy stealing from the other side. I want to tell you what that did to the math, because my father's whole case rested on a story where money went missing and I was the only one who could have taken it. And here, in a shoebox on a tailgate in Lindsborg, was proof that the money had not gone missing at all. It had gone exactly where Graham sent it, on a schedule, in her hand, recorded to the dollar. The hole in the estate that my father pointed at and named with my name was a hole he had dug himself on the other side of the ledger, with a borrowed pen and her forged signature, and Graham had logged that too. The 2 halves of the book did not just tell a story. They convicted a man and cleared a woman, line by line in the same even hand. I drove home that evening with the shoebox riding where the wool had been, and the wool folded back over the ledger, and I did not feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that. I felt the brass shell in my coat against my ribs every time I shifted. Graham's old shotgun shell, the one she used to set on the table when she taught me to breathe and count. 3 on the squeeze, 1 on the load. Settle your hands before you settle anything else. I had carried it 11 years and never quite been able to say why. I thought it was hers. I was about to learn it was not only hers, and that even that small brass thing in my pocket was a record of something my father had spent 30 years insisting I made up. Because here is the shape of the wound, and I will say it plainly so you understand what the man in that courtroom had actually done. When I was a girl, I told the truth about something the family did not want said. It does not matter now what it was. What matters is that the family needed someone to be the liar, so that the truth could go on being inconvenient and quiet. And they chose me, because I was the youngest and the most certain and the least able to defend myself. The family liar. My father hung that sign on me at 9 years old, and he watered it for 3 decades. Your little notebooks, he would say when I wrote things down. Look at her, keeping score. As if a person who records the truth is the same as a person who cannot let go of a grudge. as if precision were a sickness. He mocked the very habit that was, the entire time, my grandmother's gift to me, passed hand to hand at that kitchen table, the one thing in my life that had never once lied to me. And I had gone into the Navy at 18 in part to get out from under that sign, and the family had called that abandonment, called it me running off and leaving them to carry the farm, and my father had folded that into the legend too. She left us. She thinks she's better. And the medals, when they came, he could not allow to be real, because real medals meant the liar had been telling the truth all along. And if she had been telling the truth all along, then the sign over my head was his lie, not mine. And a man 2 payments from losing everything cannot afford to find out he is the liar. So he stood in that courtroom and he said the only thing that could keep his whole life standing. Every medal you wear is fake. He had to. It was him or me. And he had decided that 30 years ago. I understood all of it now. And understanding it did not make me want to destroy him. That surprised me. I sat in my truck in the dark outside the brick house on Santa Fe Avenue with the ledger on the seat and the shoebox at its side. And what I felt was closer to grief than to victory, because the proof in my hands was not only proof of what he did, it was proof of how frightened he must have been every single day to need me cast down so badly. My father was not a monster in a courtroom. He was a man who had spent everything, including his daughter, trying not to drown, and had nearly gotten away with it, and Graham had seen him do it, and had quietly, patiently, over 11 years, built the only thing that could stop him without my ever having to raise my voice, because that was the other half of her gift. She knew I would not shout. She knew her granddaughter sat with a straight back and folded hands and let people read guilt into a silence that was only discipline. She had heard them do it her whole life and mine. So she had not left me a speech. She had left me a record and a way to hand it over without saying a word, and a witness she could not have known I would find but trusted the world to provide. You always kept the truth, Mabel. I kept it with you. I had 8 days left before the judge signed the house to my father. The next morning I made 2 phone calls. The first was to the probate clerk on West Ash to ask how a person enters new evidence before a final order. The second I almost did not make because the number was 11 years old and I did not expect it to ring through. But it did. And a voice I had not heard since a flight deck a long way from Kansas answered on the 3rd ring and went very quiet when I said my name, and then said only, "Where, Ladner, and when?" I told her, Salina County Courthouse. 8 days. She did not ask why. Master Chief Delphine Okoro had never in her life needed a thing explained twice. She just said she would be there, and that I should wear the ribbons, all of them, and let them think whatever they liked until she got there. I hung up the phone in my grandmother's cold kitchen in the chair by the window where the light came in over my left shoulder, and I opened the ledger one more time to the green ribbon, and I sat with the woman who had kept my truth, and I began in my own even hand to make a list of what would go to the bench and in what order, so that no one in that room would be able to look away from it. The courthouse on West Ash was colder than the street that morning, the way old county buildings always are, holding the winter in their stone long after the calendar has let it go. I came in early and I sat where I had sat the first day, 2nd row on the left with the ledger across my knees and the shoebox under the bench by my heel, and the brass shell in my coat pocket against my ribs. I wore the ribbons, all of them, the way she had told me on the phone, the small bright bars in their rows above my left breast, and I felt the gallery look at them when I came in, and I felt them decide, the way this county had been deciding about me since I was 9, that a woman who would pin on a costume to fight her own father over a dead woman's house was exactly the liar they had always heard she was. I let them think it. I folded my hands and I kept my back straight and I waited. My father came in with his lawyer and a new tie and the particular heaviness in his shoulders of a man carrying a story he can no longer set down. He did not look at me. He had not looked at me in 11 years that counted. The judge took the bench, a tired man named Pruitt with reading glasses he kept pushing up, and he said we were here to settle the final disposition of the estate of Mabel Eunice Ladner, and he asked if there was anything to be entered before he signed the order that would put my grandmother's house on Santa Fe Avenue into my father's name. My father's lawyer rose first. He spoke of grief, of a family torn, of a daughter long gone who had drifted back only when there was property to be had. And then my father stood, because he could not help himself, because the panic in him needed an audience the way a fire needs a door. He turned half to the bench and half to the room, and he lifted his hand toward me, and he said the thing I had driven 500 miles of straight Kansas road to hear him say one last time so that the room could hear it too. "Your Honor," he said, "she stole from a dying woman. Every medal she wears is fake." The gallery murmured. I had been told it would feel like a blow, and it did not. It felt like the last number in a long column, the one you already know because you have added the others. I did not stand. I did not raise my voice. I have never in my life raised my voice in a room that wanted me to. I reached down and I lifted the ledger off my knees, and I stood only enough to step forward to the rail, and I opened it to the page I had marked with the green ribbon, the page where her even small hand ran down the column of dates, and I laid the sealed envelope on top of the open book, unopened, the flap still bearing the old gummed seal of a command 3 time zones from this room, and I slid the whole of it across the clerk's table toward the bench. And then I sat back down and folded my hands and said nothing, because she had not left me a speech, she had left me a record, and a record does not need a voice. Judge Pruitt looked at me over his glasses for a moment, the way you look at a person who has just done something you do not yet understand. Then he picked up the ledger. He read the page. He turned it back and read the page before it, and the one before that, his glasses sliding and his thumb going up to push them and stopping halfway. He asked the clerk to bring him the shoebox I pointed to, and he set the canceled checks beside the ledger, and he set the bank stamps beside the checks, and the room got very quiet in the way a room gets quiet when the person at the front of it has stopped performing and started reading. He laid one of the bank slips next to a signature in the back of the book, the place where Graham had copied in her patient hand the loops and the slant of a name being signed by a man who thought no one was keeping count. My father's name, his own hand on the bank slip, her tracing of his hand in the ledger, dated beside the figure he had moved and the figure he said I had taken. The same money, one whole, dug from one side, named with my name from the other. It was at that moment that the door at the back of the courtroom opened, and a woman came in. She was not tall. People always expect her to be tall. She was built close to the ground and squared off at the shoulders, and she wore a dark coat over a collar I would have known in my sleep. And she walked up the center aisle of that Salina County courtroom the way she had walked a flight deck a long time ago, like the floor belonged to her, and was glad of it. Master Chief Delphine Okoro, retired, 2 counties over, and not 1 minute late. She stopped at the rail. She did not look at me. She looked at the envelope in the judge's hands, the old seal, the command stamp in the corner, and I watched her read it across that distance, and I watched her go still. Judge Pruitt asked who she was. She gave her name and her rank and the years she had served, and the fact that she had held the security clearance required to speak to the contents of the document on his bench, and she asked the court's permission to have it read aloud since it had been entered, and since a man had stood in this room and called its bearer a fraud. The judge, who had by now stopped pushing his glasses up and simply taken them off, said he would allow it. He broke the seal himself. He read the first lines silently, his jaw working, and then he asked the clerk to read the operative entry into the record, and the clerk, a young woman with a careful voice, read it. She read the date, She read the name of an operation. 2 words. The kind of 2 words the Navy chooses to mean nothing to anyone who was not there. And the instant those 2 words crossed the room, Delphine Okoro came to attention. Not slowly, all at once. The way a thing snaps true, her heels together and her chin level and her hands flat at the seams of her trousers. And a sound came out of her that was almost not a word. And she said it aloud, into the quiet, to no one, and to the whole room. She said, "I was on that deck." And then she said the detail, the thing only the people who were there could know, that the aircraft had taken fire twice on the way out and had come back anyway, on one engine and a prayer, with everyone aboard, because the one who was meant to be evacuated had turned the aircraft around and gone back for the 2 who were still on the ground. And she looked at me then, for the first time since she had come through that door, and her eyes were wet and furious and proud, and she said, "That was you, Ladner." The clerk finished the entry. The last line of it is the line I will hear for the rest of my life, read in a stranger's careful voice in a cold county courtroom, while my father stood frozen with his new tie and his borrowed story coming apart in his hands. Operation confirmed. Recipient of record. Petty Officer Ladner. And in my coat pocket against my ribs, the brass shell was suddenly not a sewing table keepsake at all. Okoro told them, because the judge asked, and because she would not stop now, that the spent brass from that day had been gathered and given to the few who came home from it, 1 each, and that mine had gone, by my own hand, into an envelope to a woman in Kansas who I had written could be trusted to keep it, because she was the only person alive who had never once decided ahead of time that I was lying. Graham had kept it on her sewing table for 11 years next to the spools and had used it the whole time to teach a frightened foster boy how to breathe and count. 3 on the squeeze, 1 on the load. She'd been holding my proof in her hand the entire time my father told this county I had made my whole life up. My father sat down, not in defeat exactly. He sat the way a man sits when the floor he has been standing on his whole life turns out to be water, and he has only just now stopped pretending he could walk on it. His lawyer was saying things. The judge was not listening to him. Judge Pruitt set the ledger down flat on the bench, both hands on it, and he looked out at the room and he said that he was vacating the prior ruling, that the disposition of the estate would not proceed as scheduled, and that the matter of the signatures, holding up the bank slip so the room could see it, the matter of these signatures would be referred to the county attorney for review. He used the word fraud once, quietly, the way Graham used numbers, to give it weight and nothing else. He set a new date. He said the house on Santa Fe Avenue would remain as the late Mrs. Ladner had directed it in the record before him, which was to say, not to my father, and not, I will tell you, to me. She had left it in trust, the ledger showed, the same as the school money and the war widow's checks, to keep doing quietly what she had done quietly all along. I want to tell you about the parking lot because that is where the story actually ends, not at the bench. My father came out into the gray noon and stood by his truck and did not get into it. I came out behind him with the ledger wrapped in the navy wool. We stood there a while in the cold with the courthouse stone at our backs. He did not apologize. I did not need him to, and I think we both knew he could not. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Because the apology would have to be the size of 30 years, and no man can lift that all at once. But he looked at the ribbons on my coat, really looked, for the first time, and his mouth moved, and what he finally got out was not sorry. What he got out was, "She always said you kept things." He meant the notebooks. He meant the little notebooks he had mocked since I was 9. He said it like a man reading a word in a language he had refused to learn. And I understood that this was as close as he had in him, and I decided, standing there, to take it as enough. I told him the trust would help with the farm. Because it would. That was what it was for. That was what she had built it to do, to hold up the people who were drowning whether or not they deserved the hand. He put his own hand over his eyes. I left him that, and I left him his truck, and I drove to Santa Fe Avenue. There was a young man I should tell you about, the last open page. A few weeks after, through Toby, I met an 18-year-old from out past the grain elevators on Old Highway 40, a kid about to ship out, no people to speak of, the kind of kid a county learns to expect nothing from. The trust will see him through, and I did for him the one thing my grandmother did for me that mattered more than money. At her table on Santa Fe Avenue, in the chair where the light comes in over your left shoulder, I set down a brand new leather book in front of him, blank, every page of it empty and waiting, and I uncapped a pen and showed him how to make the first mark small and even and true, his own name at the top, the date beside it, the first honest line of a record no one would ever be able to take from him. He asked me what it was for. I wrote his name in my even hand and turned it so he could read it. The ledger stays open.